Previously in Forbidden Island, we had escaped the island after amassing everything we needed to collect the 4 treasures, and we escaped the helicopter lift. Now, we have crashed from said helicopter into a desert with only one option of escaping: finding the flying machine. We now return to Forbidden Desert, Thirst for Survival. Hello everyone, Hobbyist here. We are back at it again with another board game tutorial, and we are going to be talking about Forbidden Desert. Now, Forbidden Desert is the unofficial sequel to Forbidden Island, as there's no canon lore to the story, but it is definitely the next step up as far as your challenges and everything that you are looking for inside of the Forbidden series. If you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and to turn on that notification bell icon. Make sure to also hit the like on this video as well. And I will definitely keep on giving out updates of whenever new videos are going to be dropping. But let's go ahead and get into the components of what it is that you exactly get when you get Forbidden Desert. Altogether, you will get a total of 49 cards that separate into 3 different decks. You're going to get 48 sand markers, 24 desert and city tiles, 6 wooden pawns, 6 meter clips, 4 flying machine parts, the flying machine itself, the sandstorm meter, and the meter stand that comes along with it. So, first thing that I gotta discuss with you before we get into the actual setup and the mechanics of the game is that this is the first time in the Forbidden series to where it will allow you to look at the actual tiles. So let's go ahead and transition and let me show you what tiles are available to you inside of Forbidden Desert. Different tiles are what are inside of Forbidden Desert, all of which play a very different role over the course of the game. The first tile that you need to be aware of is that whenever the game begins, all of the adventurers will start on this helicopter crash site. So, unlike with Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert has the ability to be up to 5 players instead of just the 2 to 4 that was inside of Forbidden Island. So it is definitely an upgrade in comparison to the previous installment inside of the Forbidden Trilogy. As we will later learn more about what excavating means in terms of Forbidden Desert, there are going to be tiles that contain a gear symbol towards the bottom right-hand corner of the tile. And that simply means that whenever these tiles are excavated, then that means that you are going to be taking a gear card upon excavating that tile. Unlike with Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert has its own separate gear deck that offers a variety of different items that will be able to help you over the course of your journey. This tile is probably the most important tile that you need to find, because it is your ticket out of the Forbidden Desert. Once you have accumulated all of the pieces needed towards the flying machine, you need to be able to successfully find the landing pad tile in order to escape with the rest of your team. As part of a new challenge that exists inside of Forbidden Desert, water is going to be an important resource for everybody to manage. Sometimes, depending on which of these water tiles you find, you might find a well, in which case everyone who is sharing that tile will be able to gain 2 water back if they are below their highest water value. However, sometimes, depending on if you've been letting the heat get to your head, you might find a mirage, in which you will gain nothing from it, and you will have wasted actions trying to discover what it is that's on this tile. While the sun will be constantly trying to take you out over the course of a Forbidden Desert game, tunnels are your safe place. When these are excavated, on the bottom right corner you will see the gear symbol, as mentioned from previously, and these will be able to grant you gear. On top of that, whenever the sun is trying to come after you, these tunnels will protect you, therefore you do not have the ability to lose water. On top of that, based on this left corner here, you are able to spend 1 action to travel between tunnels. So you can move from one tunnel to another in order to create shortcuts and to ease movement, plus adding all of that protection benefits that I mentioned previously. The next parts are a 2-part tiles that you need to be aware of, because they are the most critical when it comes to finding the parts that you need inside of Forbidden Desert. And these are known as part clues. They come in horizontal clues, meaning that they may or may not be on that particular row, depending on how the desert is formatted. And there is a horizontal vertical. Depending on where the tiles are placed, if they are lined up on a grid, wherever the two arrows intersect will point to the location of where that particular piece will end up being. Determining what piece that might be is going to be at the bottom right corner of both tiles. So you got to be able to unveil both clues in order to successfully find the part. And we will get into finding and picking up the parts in greater detail in just a bit. But now that all the tiles have been shown to you, we are now going to transition towards setting up the actual desert. Once the tiles have been all shuffled and rearranged in any particular order, you have them face down placed in a 5x5 grid, with the first two and the last two rows having 5 tiles each. The blank in the middle of the desert is going to represent the storm's location. This is going to be very important as this plays a significant role in the key difference between Forbidden Desert and the way that Forbidden Island works. Inside of your rule diagram, it is going to then show you that you are going to create a diamond shape with the sand markers. And you're only really going to need 8 of them to then place on top of the tiles. Once the diamond-shaped formation of the sand tiles has been completed, you are then going to place the 4 parts of a flying machine, and everything else that is needed is going to be nearby. So the pieces that are part of the flying machine do come apart from the actual model, and you are going to place them off to the side on any particular side that you see fit. Once the parts have been laid down, you are then going to take the storm meter and the stand and set the level. Each of the needles that have been shown in the component section of this video do attach to the storm meter itself. The biggest difference between Forbidden Island and Desert, however, is that at the bottom of each side of the storm level, it is going to indicate to you which side that you are going to use and accommodate for based on the number of players that you have. So, for example, if you are playing on the 2-player side, you're going to attach the meter to this side. If you're playing on the 3-player side, you're going to attach it to this opposite side. If you're playing with 4 players, you're going to attach it to the left side. And if you're playing with 5 players, you're going to attach it to the right side. So it all accommodates for the number of players that you have. And looking closely, we can see that much similarly to Forbidden Island, that each of the difficulty levels are also marked onto the tracker. So, for the sakes of this video, we are going to be working on Novice, but any difficulty can be played depending on your skill level. Once the storm meter has been appropriately adjusted, you are going to separate the stack of cards into 3 different piles. First is going to consist of the 6 adventurers that you will potentially get to play as throughout the course of the game. The second is the gear cards that you will possibly gain through the excavation of certain tiles and locating those gear logos, as mentioned previously when we looked at the tiles. Lastly, you are going to separate the storm deck from those, and this is going to dictate the level of difficulty throughout the course of the game. And after appropriately shuffling each of these piles, you are going to separate them. As the roles are randomly assigned, there are a total of 6 different possibilities of choices as far as which explorer that you may be able to get, as these adventurers will have a variety of different abilities that will enable you to progress towards your goal, as is the case with Forbidden Island. But the biggest difference, however, is that we will notice that on this side of the adventurer cards is that there is a canteen level. Each of the roles has a canteen level in which the clips that you are having left over are going to be attached to each individual card. Based on the roll you get, the maximum might be 5, but more times than not, it might be 4, or as low as 3. You are going to consult that card on that random draw. But let me go ahead and explain to you some of the rolls that you might be able to get over the course of random selection. The first role that we are going to mention inside of Forbidden Desert is the Archaeologist, represented by the red pawn. If you manage to get him inside of your adventure, he has the ability to clear 2 sand from 1 tile per action. This is going to be important later on, but this is just one of the many adventurers, and we will go through each of the actions inside of Forbidden Desert to give a comparison from what has changed from Forbidden Island to Desert, and what of the main mechanics has mostly remained the same. Represented by the white pawn, we have the Meteorologist, who has 4 on his canteen level, but he has 2 abilities. The first of which says, spend actions to draw fewer storm cards, 1 card per action, at the end of your turn. In addition to this, the Meteorologist also has the ability to spend 1 action to look at storm cards equal to the storm level, and optionally place 1 at the bottom of the deck. Depending on the game and scenario that you might be in, the Meteorologist may or may not be useful inside of your game. It is entirely up to you. But inside of this co-op game, it is especially important to take advantage of every ability that you have available to you, and to make the best with what you have. Character to have traveled over from Forbidden Island and made his way into Forbidden Desert, you guys must remember the Navigator, represented by the yellow pawn. This time, instead of the 2 adjacent that we had earlier inside of Forbidden Island, we've got some additional abilities for the Navigator that make him stronger inside of this game. So he can still move another player, but he can move them up to 3 unblocked tiles per action instead of just the 2. In addition to this, this includes movement inside of tunnels, where you can move people from tunnel to tunnel. You can also use the Explorer's ability, and the Climber can also be moved according to their special abilities as well. So you get advantages from using other people's abilities, which is a significant upgrade inside of Forbidden Desert in comparison to what you had with Forbidden Island. The Explorer has the same abilities as he had in the previous game, and is the other character that has made it over from the island into the desert, and has the ability to move, clear sand, and use dune blasters diagonally, which becomes very important inside of this game. While the Black Pawn has returned to us inside of the Forbidden series, his role has significantly changed. No longer the diver, the Climber offers a different variety of opportunities for you inside of Forbidden Desert. The Climber has the ability to move to block tiles, which I will explain what that actually means in greater detail. And he also has the ability to take 1 other player with you when you move, being able to pair off and to explore together, providing a different opportunity of different ways to explore the desert. Lastly, you and other players on your tile cannot be buried. This will play a crucial role as we explain what burying means inside of Forbidden Desert. Lastly, but most certainly not least, we have the Water Carrier. As we can probably tell, just based on my own superstition, Pilot didn't make it from Forbidden Island. When he crashed, he died in the plane crash. But we do have the Water Carrier now. He has the most water inside of Forbidden Desert with a water canteen level of 5. He also has the ability to take 2 water from excavated water tiles from 1 action. And he can give water to players on adjacent tiles for free at any time. This all becomes important as he is the role to make sure that the group survives, and is hopefully the role that you are able to get. Because in my personal opinion, I think he is the most crucial, regardless of what combination of adventurers you have. You're randomly assigning the roles to each of the respective players, depending on the number of players you have. You are going to take the card and give them to each of the player areas, and you are going to put the representative pawns on the helicopter crash site. For each player, after they have received their card and placed the pawn on the helicopter crash site, you're going to take your card and your clip, and you are going to attach the clip to the highest line that is on top of your character card. The first player inside a Forbidden Desert is determined by whoever is the thirstiest. You could mean thirstiest as in the legitimate sense of like not having water. You could be thirstiest being whoever has the lowest water on their roll. It's entirely up to you, but that player always goes first, and then it goes to the left. As this is a cooperative game, you are going to want to constantly be in communication with your teammates as far as coordinating your movements and making sure that everybody knows what you are capable of inside of your abilities, because you want to maximize as much potential as you possibly can. However, the order of play is as such. You take up to 4 actions this time instead of the 3 actions that were inside of Forbidden Island, and then you draw storm cards equal to the storm level. It's very simple enough, but what 4 actions can be detailed? Following actions that can be taken inside of a game of Forbidden Desert is to move, clear sand, excavate, or pick up a part. You can do any combination of these actions, and you can go up to 4 actions, meaning that you could take no actions during your turn, you could take 1 action, you could take 2, and you could take 3. So you could do movement your entire turn, you could clear sand your entire turn, you could excavate tiles if you are able to your entire turn, or pick up parts your entire turn. It all just depends on whatever the situation may require of you. But when it comes to moving, you are only able to move adjacent between unblocked tiles and in between blocked tiles. Meaning that, for example, our meteorologist has the ability to move here or there. The only exception to this adjacent rule is the explorer, who has the ability to move diagonal. Furthermore, instead of moving by himself, the climber can take any one other player with him as he moves. Clearing sand is another action that you have the ability to do, and it is very similar to shoring up tiles inside a Forbidden Island. As in, you are able to clear sand by removing 1 sand marker, either from the tile that you are currently on, or you can do it to an adjacent tile. And it is generally costing 1 action per tile. However, with the exception of the archaeologist here, he has the ability to remove 2 pieces of sand for 1 action. Excavating a tile has a completely different rule. The only way that you are able to excavate a tile is if there is no sand on it, and is the only action to where if you commit to excavating a tile, there is no undoing the action and trying to come up with a new plan. Because the whole idea is that the tiles are to remain mysterious until they are excavated. But the only way to do that is if it is on a tile that is no sand and has the desert side facing up, you simply move the character and flip over the tile and resolve the space. As we can see here, the water carrier then gains a gear based on the gear logo, and you are only able to gain gear whenever the tile is first excavated. Once the tile has been excavated, you can no longer gain gear from it. Same is the case if you are able to discover a well. The only exception being that the water carrier has the ability to use the well multiple times, whereas for other roles, the well, once it is excavated, is a one-time use. Ship parts can only be picked up inside a Forbidden Desert if the tile that where the 2 clues intersect is unmarked, meaning it has no sand on it, and the tile has to be excavated as well. So everything has to be completely clear in order for you to pick up the part piece And once you do pick up a part piece, it simply just sits beside your roll's card, reminding everyone that we do have that part. Over the course of a game, sometimes characters might start losing water. This is going to be a problem as it makes it more difficult to survive the desert. However, if you and another player are on the same tile, you have the ability to freely, without any action required, be able to give as much water as need be in order to help your teammates out. In order to simply give water, you simply just take the hits to where you can bump up the other player's water, and then the person giving water has to come down that level of water in order to make sure that that player can stay alive. This can happen at any time. However, the water carrier has the exception to where he does not have to be on the same tile as that other player in order to be able to give water. For example, the archaeologist is adjacent to the water carrier at the current moment, so he has the ability to then give as much water as need be if the timing of it all seems right. As you collect gear from the gear deck, sometimes depending on its use or where it might be best utilized, you might want to pass off equipment to other characters. For example, the time throttle right here allows 2 more actions during a turn. It may or may not prove beneficial to give to the water carrier depending on the situation and how you guys communicate. During that time that you guys are on the same tile, and this can happen at any time at the cost of no actions whatsoever, you can simply pass off that gear tile from one player to another. Once all 4 actions, or up to 4 actions, have been completed inside of Forbidden Desert, we are then going to move on to the storm card draw. And remember, if the meteorologist is in play, he has the ability to spend actions to not draw cards. But what happens if the meteorologist isn't in play? Altogether, the storm deck encompasses 3 different kinds of cards. The first of which is the storm picks up card, meaning that this is the type of card that will be able to build up the sand meter and thus make it more difficult, to where instead of drawing 2 cards at a time, you might be drawing 3, might be drawing 4, might be drawing 5, or might be getting crazy enough to draw 6 cards at a time. The Sun Beats Down card is the way that characters lose water. Players each lose 1 water unless they are in a tunnel or under a solar shield. Solar shields are gear that are able to protect you from the sun, but otherwise everyone else is going to be losing water. This can be a problem as this makes this a further challenge. So the reason that you're wanting to find these wells and to make sure that your water stays up is to make sure that the sun beats down doesn't get you. The last card that exists inside of the storm deck is the direction of where the storm blows. Based on the location of where the gap is going to be, aka the storm, is going to tell you if the tiles themselves actually shift. So in that card's example, we would move 2 tiles up, and for each tile that gets moved by the storm, a sand gets added onto that tile. 1 sand does not mean that the tile was blocked and can still be moved through. However, if 2 or more sand get added onto a tile, then it becomes blocked. Blocked tiles are always indicated by the X that is on the back of these sand tiles. And whenever they are stacked on top of a particular tile, then that means that that tile cannot be passed through, with, of course, the only exception being the climber, who has the ability to move through blocked tiles. Therefore, the path might become more difficult to move through over the course of the game, depending on how much sand gets put down. Happens to a player to where that tile gets 2 or more sand added to it, that is when that player becomes buried in sand. Meaning that they have no ability to move until they dig themselves out of the sand in order to take turns. This could become a problem because it could be wasting actions and not being able to progress to where you find the clues to take on the pieces. In addition to this, if this buried action takes place on any of the clues or on any of the tunnels, then it renders those abilities useless, meaning that if a tunnel gets buried in sand, then you are pushed out of the tunnel and are very much so exposed to the sun as it beats down. If it covers any one of the two intersecting tiles that are clues for the parts, then you are unable to place the part in order to where it intersects because the clue isn't activated. So you got to keep that in mind when it comes to managing your sand. Through the entire storm deck, then and you have no more cards to draw, then you simply have to reshuffle the storm deck and then restack it to form a new storm deck. Sometimes, depending on the storm's location of where it ends up moving, you will have a thing happen to where the storm will respite. Meaning that if there isn't a tile to move, if you needed to move a tile to the left, for example, or in this particular example, we drew the 2 up at this current position, then that simply means that your team gets a respite from the storm from that card, and no tiles get moved, nor do any sand markers get placed, which is really nice. It gives you a bit of a break from the storm. This especially happens if the storm is ending up in any of the 4 corners of the desert, where it becomes a lot more difficult to move tiles. And this can happen to when you have fewer tiles to move. So for example, if that same card came up at any of the other locations and we didn't have enough tiles to move, let's say it was a move 3, and we were only able to move 2 or 1, let's say it was 3 to the right, then there would be a respite from the storm for the 3rd tile, and only these 2 tiles would move, thus giving you a break and giving you the opportunity to do what you can to manage. Once all the parts have been successfully collected, and every single player makes their way to the landing pad where the flying machine is, you simply take the parts that have been collected, reassemble the flying machine, and you have successfully flown out of the Forbidden Desert. While I've explained to you the various ways to play, and how it is exactly that we're trying to win, this game is actually pretty difficult, as there are 3 possible ways to lose inside of Forbidden Desert. First of which is that if at any roll runs out of water and it hits the skull, then that means that that player has died from thirst and everybody loses the game. If this supply from the sand runs out because you needed to add a sand marker to a tile but there aren't any left, then that means that everyone inside of Forbidden Desert has gotten buried and everybody loses the game. The storm meter keeps on climbing way too high and it hits the skull at the very top, then that means all players have been swept away by the storm and everyone loses the game. But now that you know the ways to win and the multiple ways to lose, let me go over some tips and additional notes that you might want to keep in mind when playing Forbidden Desert. In regards to the storm deck itself, as you are drawing storm cards and they're going into the discard pile, throughout the course of the game you have the ability to look into the discard pile, to realize how many cards are left, and to kind of predict what cards may or may not be coming. Why is this important, you ask? Well, let me give you some numbers in regards to what it is that is encompassed inside of the storm deck. As we mentioned in the earlier half of the component section of this video, we talked about how there are 31 total cards inside the Storm deck. However, there are only 4 Sun Beats Down cards that exist in the Storm deck, and there are only 3 Storm Picks Up cards, meaning that the rest of the Storm deck consists of where the wind is going to blow. Therefore, it could make it very easy to predict and to assume that if all the Sun Beats Down cards are out, then there's no way that anybody's going to lose water. And this would be the time to kind of focus on managing the sand, to replenishing everybody's water, and to kind of moving out into the rest of the Forbidden Desert in order to get those clues and pick up those parts. If all the Storm Picks Up cards are out, then that means that the Storm is no longer picking up to the point to where now you're going to be drawing more cards, and that it's easier to anticipate that there might be Sun Beats Down cards coming, or that there are going to be a lot of Wind Blows cards coming out as well. So that's just something to kind of help your group anticipate what it is that's coming. In regards to the part location, we know that it is wherever the both clues intersect where the part is going to be located. In the case that where the 2 points intersect is where the storm currently is, for example, where these 2 red compass clues intersect, then the part simply goes in the eye of the storm, and whenever the tile gets moved into the location of the part, then that is where the piece will remain. Once 2 clues have been aligned and the part is already there, the storm cannot break up the clues to where it will make the part go away. The part will be permanently out and onto the board itself once the clues have aligned for the first time and have pointed in the direction of where it is going to be for the first time. That you have to consider when playing Forbidden Desert is that even if you use the Terrascope and find exactly where the other part is going to be, and you know exactly where both clues are going to intersect, you cannot place the part ahead of time. Both tiles have to be excavated. And that you gotta remember that in between turns, to where even if you know that a part is going to show up at a particular location, it's possible that when the wind blows, it's subject to change. The tiles are going to be constantly shifting, and sand is going to pick up, so it might throw off track whatever your anticipated movement was going to be. Another thing to take into consideration is that when we talked about sharing water and passing equipment for free, you cannot have more than the maximum number of water indicated on your canteen at any time. You can't go higher than 4 or 3 or 5, depending on the roll that you get. And as I mentioned earlier, you do not have the ability to undo an excavate action. When we had examined the tiles in the very beginning, it is very important to know that when you are looking at the tiles, when you are looking at the potential of what abilities are there, and where things may or may not shake up, once these tiles have been turned over, you cannot look at them again. Lastly, the launching pad that you need to get to in order to be able to successfully escape the desert needs to be unblocked. Meaning that if the tile has 1 sand on it, it is not considered blocked, and you can still get to it in order to escape. If it's got 2 or more on it, then it is considered blocked and you cannot escape until you have cleared at least down to 1 sand. Even though ideally you'd want to clear it all because it prevents sand from building back up again. The final tip that I have for you inside of Forbidden Desert is constantly communicate with your teammates. You are all in this together. You are all in this to either win or to lose. Coordinate your movements with your teammates. Decide who's getting what equipment. Decide whether it's more important to manage the sand or to manage the water. What is the storm meter looking like? What is the discard pile looking like? If you are constantly communicating with your teammates on what you can do, maximizing the potential of everyone's abilities that you have access to, you are more than likely going to win the game. Most importantly, however, that when it comes to gear inside a Forbidden Desert, once that gear has been used, whether it be used at any time, or if it had been used during that player's turn, it goes to the box and doesn't come back. The gear pile does not reshuffle once everything has been used. Once it's been used, it's gone. So my recommendation would be to really save using your gear until the very last moment. It might be more advantageous if you have a lot of that gear to use some of it earlier, but otherwise, try to hold on to it for as long as you possibly can. And use it at the very last second. So overall, what do I think of the Forbidden series? Honestly, I think Desert does everything better than what Island does. Island, in my opinion, I think is too simple if you are trying to compare the two. And as far as the Forbidden series goes, I like that there's additional mechanics and more things to think about. But the main thing that I like that's carried over is just the symmetry of how there are things to manage, and how it's still familiar enough to where it's not too radically different, to where new people can't get the hang of Forbidden Desert by itself. But I think I've been enjoying the continuity so far of everything. So I would definitely recommend a Forbidden Desert to anybody, whether this be the first game of the series that you play with, or if you played Forbidden Island first and then you moved on to Forbidden Desert. But now, just as an update, I want to let you guys know that this is going to be the last board game tutorial for this year, at the current moment. My anticipated plan is that post the holidays, I will have a relatively large board game haul to where I'll be able to record more content for you guys and more tutorials for you guys after the holidays. As to me, I just don't have enough variety at the current moment in order to get you stuff. So anticipate videos potentially on Trail at House on the Hill. Anticipate potential videos definitely on Forbidden Sky, definitely on Pandemic, and all of its expansions with On the Brink, In the Lab, in State of Emergency. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time going into the new year.